justice, $5.6 billion was lost in a year, with over 15 million people falling victim. That's 28 people every minute, nearly one person every 2 seconds. The culprit behind this is credit card fraud, which is the misuse of a credit card by a person who's not authorized to use it. How many of you here either have a credit card or a debit card? That basically covers everyone. So by having in possession a credit card or a debit card, you're taking on that risk of possibly being exposed to this kind of fraud. Personally, having firsthand experience with, I know how nerve-wracking it can be to go through this, which is why it's important to be aware of what credit card fraud is and some of the things associated with it, which we're going to talk about it today. So some of the topics included the types of fraud that are committed, including the penalties for committing this kind of fraud, and then ways that you can try and prevent this from happening to you. So there's 5 types of fraud that we're going to talk about today, although there's a lot more, and we'll go over each one in detail. So the first one is pretty straightforward. It's physical stealing, which is physically stealing the card and using it. People who commit fraud in this way take the card and they'll use it to make transactions, and they participate in something called the carding process, in which case when they have your card they want to check to see first if it's valid and if it's not going to be declined. So what they do is they'll either go to a store or online, they'll try and make a small purchase, usually something like a pack of gum or trying to donate a small amount. That way it's not suspicious. If the card gets declined, they can easily pay for that with cash without putting a dent in their pocket. This is usually the most common way that cards get stolen or your card gets lost. Another one is called transactions from a non-present card. It's also referred to as CNP, which means card not present transactions. In this case, the person committing the fraud isn't stealing your physical card. What they do is they take all of your information. So they're taking your account number, the name, the expiration date, and in this way, they won't really be able to make purchases at the store, but they can easily make purchases online or through mail because they don't need a physical card. And this makes it difficult for merchants. They can't really detect any fraud here because they have no way of IDing you and seeing if you really have that card in your possession, which makes it difficult to authorize the purchase. Another method is also skimming, and this relies somewhat on technology. The general scenario occurs when dishonest employees are making illegal copies of cards using a skimmer device, which you can see right there. It's really small and can fit in the palm of your hand. And what it does is, when you swipe a credit card, the magnetic strip on your card stores all your information from your account. So that's your account number, any information that they can access. And what they do is when they swipe that card, all that information gets stored in there, or they can send it out to either a cell phone or an iPod, an iPad, a computer, in the form of an email or a text message. And usually, for example, if you're at a restaurant paying for your bill with a credit card, the waiter or waitress comes up to you and you give them your card and they walk away and then bring it back. During that time when they're gone, you don't know what they're doing with your card, and that's usually the occurrence that happens with this. What they'll do is they'll swipe your card for the transaction of the meal, and then they'll swipe it on their own skimmer, and they have all your credit card information then, and then you can use it. Another way that this is used is through ATM skimming. All the ATMs can be, all the hardware can be removed. So this is something riskier. Not many people do this just because banks do have security cameras. But the outside can be removed, and each ATM has its own skimmer, which checks your credit card information whenever you're making withdrawals or deposits. And so someone committing a fraud would remove that and put in their own skimmer. It will still process information, you're still getting your money, the bank's still getting your information, but what you don't know is a third party is getting all your account information. This is probably one of the scariest, most hazardous of the methods, which is an account takeover, which means someone is taking over your entire account. In this case, they'd have to have a lot of information. They'd have to know your name. A lot of the times your social security number. What they'll do is in the phone book, they'll look up your mailing address and your phone number, and the card will call the card issuer, like Visa, for example, and they'll try to request an address change. So by doing this, they have all your information, so they can impersonate you, and they'll call and change their address to address of their own, somewhere where it's secure and no one will be checking the mail. So if you do report your card stolen or lost or request a second card, that card's going to go straight to the person committing the fraud. And then one of the least effective methods, and also a very common one, is email spread. It's usually targeted for older individuals or people who don't use email that often, that might be naive to fall subject to this. They'll send out emails, marketing products and services that you won't actually receive upon payment, or they'll pretend to be your bank trying to request your account information. There's a few penalties for committing fraud. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, 7% of Americans have either been victims of credit or debit card fraud. The penalty falls under the overarching topic of identity theft. So the Illinois statute states that most of these will fall under Class 4 felony, which means that you'll either get a sentence of 1 to 3 years in prison, along with on and off probation possibilities, or a $25,000 fine for each occurrence of fraud that you've committed. According to the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, you can't really prevent fraud from happening if you do have a credit or debit card, but what you can do is make it more difficult for someone to take that information from you. Some of the ways you can do this is just checking your statements regularly, making sure those transactions are transactions that you're actually doing and performing, keeping your eyes open when you hand your credit card to someone, making sure you see where it goes, where it's being swiped. And seeing any suspicious activity, reporting it right away. It's better to be safe or sorry and have them check it out. So as a quick refresher, today we learned about the widespreadness of credit card fraud. So we talked about different types of fraud, the penalties that can occur, and then ways that you can try and prevent this from happening. The Federal Trade Commission estimates that 10 million people fall victim to credit card theft each year. So one of the reasons that we have to be aware of credit card fraud and why it's important to know about is because of the trickle-down effect. Even though you don't maybe own a credit card, you can still be affected by it. Credit card companies lose millions each year, and so in order to compensate for those losses, they have to raise interest rates and then fees for all of their consumers. So either way, it affects everyone in some way, and so it's always good to take precautions and know what's going on with your accounts.